A flower of such rare beauty had never before blossomed in the fertile soil of Portugal. So exquisitely did the court poets write about her. Indeed, she was a child born of love. For the sake of their happiness, Queen Maria Francisca and King Pedro even staged a coup. Their only daughter, Isabella Luisa, was destined to be the happiest of girls. She was born in the magnificent Ribera Palace in the 17th century, at a time when her father was formally known as the Regent of Portugal. In reality, however, Pedro Braganza wielded full control over the kingdom, which his incapacitated brother, exiled from court, could not do. The young princess was adored. This pretty, sweet, and kind girl grew up in an atmosphere of unconditional love and reverence. When her father finally attained royal status, Isabella Luisa was officially named the heir to the throne. But with the joy of her new elevated position came sorrow, as the same year saw the passing of the princess's mother. King Pedro was inconsolable. Suggestions from relatives that it might be wise to remarry filled him with outrage. Maria Francisca had always been the center of his universe, and he could not imagine life with another woman. However, he soon had to change his perspective. His beloved daughter, Isabella Luisa, frequently fell ill, meaning the fate of Portugal rested on her fragile health. Thus, King Pedro married Maria Sofia of Neuburg, a charming princess who was expected to provide him with new heirs. The stepmother turned out to be a woman with a kind heart. Not once did a quarrel occur between the new queen and Isabella Luisa. On the contrary, they got along splendidly. Maria Sofia, like her stepdaughter, was passionate about history and spoke Italian and Spanish beautifully. They even shared similar tastes in clothing and jewelry. Emerald green suited them both so well that they often appeared at court in almost identical dresses. It was a true idyll. Talk of a future marriage for the Portuguese Infanta began even during her mother's lifetime. At that time, a union with the Dauphin Louis, son of the Sun King of France, was being seriously considered. While Versailles approved of this option, doubts began to arise in Lisbon. What could the marriage of two heirs to the throne lead to? The unification of two kingdoms? Heaven forbid. Gradually, discussions about a marriage with the French Dauphin faded away. The engagement to John Gaston Medici was considered a done deal. However, this unloved son of the Tuscan duke, abandoned by his mother, was rumored to have an unstable temperament. It was said that he cried alone in his room at night, while in public, he was sullen and unfriendly. The King of Portugal loved his daughter too much to marry her off to such a peculiar candidate. The Spanish neighbors proposed the candidacy of Charles II, the heir to their own throne. This contender also faced rejection. Firstly, for political reasons. Secondly, the mental state of the Spanish prince raised concerns as well. A product of centuries of inbreeding, this young man was lacking in health, intelligence, and good looks. For a long time, the most likely candidate for Infanta Isabella Luisa was Victor Amadeus of Savoy. He was a cousin of the princess, coming from the same noble house, and was close to her in age and upbringing. The only hitch was that the groom was needed in Lisbon, which meant he would have to leave his hereditary lands. Who would then manage the estate? Negotiations entered their final phase. A fleet of 8 ships was on its way to the shores of Portugal carrying the envoy of the House of Savoy, the Duke of Cadaval. The groom himself set out a bit later but stopped in Turin, where he was suddenly struck by a terrible fever. The prince's mother, who was accompanying him, expressed such concern for her son's health that continuing the journey was out of the question. It all looked rather absurd. The Portuguese court was left in suspense, the ailing groom in Turin, and numerous gossipers claimed that Victor Amadeus had changed his mind, suggesting that his illness was merely an excuse not to go any further. Soon, Lisbon was officially notified that the Sardinian heir was returning home due to his serious illness and needed to recover. They promised to revisit the marriage plans at a later date. In response, King Pedro broke off the engagement between Victor Amadeus and his daughter. He has no idea what he's turning down, the Portuguese monarch laughed. In reality, years later, when the prince was shown a portrait of Isabella Luisa, He was beside himself with rage that his wedding had been derailed for such a foolish reason. Isabella Luisa remained calm. She was too young to worry about her future. If one suitor didn't work out, another would surely come along. Before long, the heir to the Palatinate came forward, along with other potential candidates. Soon after, King Pedro welcomed his son. From that moment on, Isabella Luisa was no longer referred to as the heir to Portugal, which made it much easier for her to find a groom. There was no longer a need to insist that the newlyweds stay in Lisbon. A substantial dowry was prepared for the Infanta, and she was to receive a dozen prestigious titles. However, the prospective bride never had the chance to try on her wedding dress, as she was diagnosed with smallpox. The doctors quickly informed the king that saving the princess was impossible. Beautiful and young, she had always struggled with her health. The illness proved to be fatal. Isabella Luisa passed away. She was buried next to her mother in the monastery founded by Maria Francisca, São Vicente de Fora. Poets, who had recently sung the praises of the princess's beauty, penned many mournful verses about her, referring to her as the eternal bride. None of her 5 engagements ever led to a wedding.